So thank you for the invitation and for those who are coming here in between this pandemic, so to listen to us three, to Tiago, to Oren, and I. And I will not present myself. I think throughout the presentation, those who don't know me and my work will come to understand what we're doing. When Paulo invited me to come, I thought I would speak about this book, which is the outcome of a fieldwork research around the Baltic region on the systemic post-industrial condition that still connects the three different countries that are not Soviet any longer. They are not part of Russia, they are not part of Soviet Union, which are Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. But in the end, I thought it's a good opportunity to speak about what has been gathering us and what has been splitting us in the last months. And doing field work is not possible, so we're impeded from going to our fields and to develop our work. We've been Zooming a lot, doing conferences, facing cameras all time, seeing ourselves in mirrors, in the screen. So I thought, why not take it more informally, since it's summer and it's almost an evening event. And I decided to approach it as a work in progress. So this was recent. When gathering the PowerPoints, I decided to speak about what we're doing. And so in fieldwork, we are spatially inside the fields and paradigmatically outside of the object. So we go there, informed by where we come from. We sit there, we use the space, but we are not from that place. Of course, these are concepts from anthropology, and I believe Tiago Castela dominates it well when speaking about his issues. But I will just browse a few fields, a few spaces and places I've been to in the last years. So when going to Chernobyl and facing this invisible enemy, which is not the virus, but it's radiation, you face not these kind of masks, but other kinds of physical apparatus to impede you from being contaminated. So you exceed these fields not being from the sides, and you have your own paradigms to approach it. When going, for instance, to Detroit, and this helps to bring the post-industrial issues again to the table, it's such wide territory where the city started to vanish and it's becoming a prairie again. So the city is being demolished, is being burnt down, the city is vanishing, and it's becoming nature, whether by agriculture or by infestation, so the city is vanishing. So fieldwork connotes the convergence of fields of activity, intellectual disciplines and methodologies with forms of artistic and other cultural practices, none of which can exist in discrete bounded isolation. Rather than interdisciplinarity, which produces an intertextuality out of named and recognized disciplines, fieldwork suggests that if we focus our well-furnished attention on a named something, it might constitute itself as a field. So we are inventing our own fields. We are cutting the objects, and therefore, from a different perspective of what I consider that curating is, we are curating our own objects. He speaks about how reality is what is inscribed through science and knowledge and is represented through presences. And he speaks about what is left outside. And those absences, sometimes they are manifests because they are excluded and repressed, a bit like this discussion on the monuments and why this monument and that, why this hero and that. So what is being repressed, celebrated, and what is being inscribed. But as well, there's the unknown, the out there, the other existences of reality, which we can approach through other layers. And one is fiction, allegory, metonym, metaphor. So literature and language are also constructions that allow us to read the reality. And John Law brings these layers to complexify a bit more what he developed with Bruno Latour. So actor network theory is more grounded to reality and relations, and he brings this other more immanent dimension grounded in language and on imagination. And that you will understand what I'm bringing this to the table. So it's fiction. So we have data, we have documents, we have the facts, but we also have fiction to start approaching our sites. And when The brothers Strugarsky wrote the Roadside Picnic, this book that is a fiction on aliens and on this invasion, the infestation of the planet. He opened the road to Tarkovsky's film, to Stalker. So literature opened the road to Stalker. And Stalker, the film, opened the road to understanding what Chernobyl accident would be. And this Chernobyl documentary that you know, it's not a documentary, it's a fiction. It was filmed in Estonia, it was not filmed in Ukraine. So there's all these layers in which we relate to reality, we relate to different modes of fieldwork, and one of them, it's also fiction and how it somehow informs our expectation on reality. Film, and this film was experimental back then, became part of our popular culture, and our popular culture inform what we expect to find in reality. So there's an interplay in between reality, the presences, the represented, and this kind of otherness. So we are dealing with all these dimensions when trying to grasp the complex sites we've been relating to. Like this fine arts classroom in Chernobyl's school in Pripyat. So Pripyat's fine arts school is like this now, and it somehow resonated. There's an allegorical dimension because there's a lecturer in fine arts school here. You go to Chernobyl and you resonate your own identity with a place where others were teaching the same that you are teaching here. So even if lonesome, we never enter the fields alone. And I think this is a very relevant thing, and I hope you understand what we're trying to say. We are kind of cowboys, kind of Lucky Luke cowboys trying to enter these deserts, these territories, which of course are fully occupied. They are transformed by many years and decades and millennium of human occupation. But nonetheless, when we enter it the first time, we feel alone. But we're not. And in my case, I want to share with you a few of my references. So these women I've been working with or working on or working through in the last decades. So Donna Haraway, as a theorist on culture and technique, she relates to technology and culture and how we are these mixed cyborg constructions, and she expands the possibilities of the construction of an identity through conundrums. Aneta Siwak, which some of you met, and I will speak about her work a bit later. She's a curator in Gdansk. She works in Gdansk shipyards. She's now director of the Contemporary Art section of the National Museum, opening not in November this year, but May next year because of the pandemic. Edith Rogov, whose quote I've read before, and she was my PhD supervisor, and I work with her in this European Forum for Advanced Practices now. And Denise Scott Brown, of course, as one of the main figures, main leaders of what fieldwork can do to architecture research. And there's some men as well in this. Yeah, it's inclusive. We consider all sorts of people in the kind of work we do. Bradley Garrett, he's an archaeologist developing urban exploration, so he's one of these urbex experts. Tim Evanson, he's a theorist on industrial ruins and the aesthetics of ruination and the afterlife of buildings. And John Law, the theorist who I've quoted through my schematic diagram. The cluster tries to articulate different preoccupations, different people, different geographies. So it's not exactly a project to be implemented, but it's much more tentative as a gathering of different people who are looking at me with very beautiful eyes right now, some of them at least. And so it's this kind of trying to gather different sensitivities, different possibilities, different knowledges, so to create our own fields. These networks are simultaneously the systemic conditions in which reality is articulated, but it's also the theoretical framework from actor network theory, from John Law, so it's at the same time systemic and epistemological, trying to bring together these many different dimensions. And then we respond to different disciplines. Of course, architecture and heritage and history. There's a preoccupation with ruins and fragments. There's a strong preoccupation with advanced practices. What does it mean to think outside the structure of knowledge production officially proposed by academia? There's this European network I'm part of. And with communities and the narratives being told about space. And we proceed through fieldwork, reporting, and exhibiting, not necessarily everything at the same time. Some of the topics of research are preservation and reconstruction, industrial heritage, accidented territories, anti-monuments, regeneration, urban and visual cultures. Not everybody is working on everything, of course. So there's clusters of interest within the cluster. And maybe each project will be part of a different circle. So projects change, people change, and then there's people. So I decided that since they cannot be here, but some are, and instead of speaking of a project that was published, I will show you some of the work that is being done. Annette Schiwak, I hope most of you have heard of her problem. Oh, there's Orlando over there. Annette Schiwak is part of, is the curator of this museum I told you about. She's been working with Gdansk shipyards for 20 years. I've worked with her doing fieldwork on site before demolition. So the site is severely transformed in the last 15 years, I would say. The first time I went there, they opened the first cultural center. It was 2007. So in 15 years, it really changed a lot. And now it's a highly gentrified area. They call it New Gdansk, so it's the new city being rebuilt following, I would say, Danish or Dutch kind of architecture, but at the same time dealing with the community, dealing with the memories of the past and with a certain political activism, so to keep alive the workers' movement that is still grounded on that area. Orlando Vieira Francisco, he's a former engineer and an activist and artist. His work is very wide, dealing mostly with issues of inequality and geopolitics, and issues of colonialism in Brazil. And when we met, Orlando was evading his engineering past, I hope you agree. So Orlando was an engineer, a structural engineer, but he wanted to raise a more artistic way of activating activism against engineer. Yeah, so he became an activist against engineering. And this work of Orlando was presented on the first oblique think tank that we organized last year, and it's on the burst of the dams in Brazil, in Minas Gerais. So in Minas Gerais, there were 2 dam bursts, one, and the next year there was another one. This image is in Mariana, and then there was another one in Brumadinho the next year. And Orlando is here, so if you're curious, he can talk about it. Elena La Cruz is in the Canary Islands. She's in Las Palmas. She's an architect and a surf instructor. And Elena was a lecturer in architecture. She was interested in heritage and in landscape, and suddenly she started walking around the islands and doing trespassing and trying to find all these remote locations. So fieldwork here is illegal. It's severe. We're speaking about volcanoes and islets and very faraway locations. And there's a physical risk in this kind of work. Eventually the shipyard in the beginning as well. Eventually in Mariana, if you step the fence and try to collect animals and pieces of furniture from people's houses like Orlando did, there's illegality as well. But it's not possible to make everything neat and objective and legal if the curiosity on a site makes you move. So not everything can be planned, and maybe things can be stated after, not before. So Elena's research on the anti-monuments of Canary Islands tries to propose another narrative on the failure of this progressive consumption of geography and natural resources in Canarias, and we're working on it now as well. Work keeps. Miguel Costa is sitting over there with a black mask. And Miguel took well, I poked him. Miguel, he's a landscape architect. But he's an architect, but now he's more of a landscape architect, and that's good because we need different knowledges and expertises. And so Miguel went to study the ruderal invasion, so the ruderal plants and vegetation in Freixo area. One of our site is Freixo, and his very specific research, it's on the colonial mobility and transnational movement of seeds and plants, and how we can see this transglobal commercial and unexpected voyage in our landscapes. And so some images are here, the work is unfolding. We are having a big event next year in July. This cannot be completely addressed yet, but in July, and hopefully his work will be part of it. And two other work in progresses. So one is, it's already done, and the other one is a work in progress. I don't know where Beatriz, oh, there she is, where Beatriz is. Hugo Veiga was studying the upper factory in Maia, Portugal. It's the transformation of this non-symbolic, non-extraordinary building, but it's a building that is relevant for that locality. So people refer to it as the upper. There's the upper factory and the lower factory, which was the main one. And he, well, related to with great success to these sites, having 20 grade on his master's last year. And Beatriz, we hope she will do the same for Freixo Power Station very soon. Other things I want to bring to the table, and I will not spend much more time, is aside fieldwork and gathering knowledge and information and data and documentation from all these sites, we are also organizing these oblique think tanks. The first one was last year in Ateneo, and the second one was this year, exactly before confinement. Some people were still traveling and could not attend, but then we were all trapped in town and we could not meet. So there's this contradiction. Before we could fly and we could not meet, and then we were trapped and we could not meet. So since the Oblique Think Tank in late February, this work has been halted. So the cluster is not working properly in full steam as it should, or we want it. And that's one of the reasons I thought it was interesting to speak about this work in progress that we have. So how to gather these field workers, saying Fieldworkers Unite. It started as a joke, but it ends up as a research cluster. And this image is one of the performances that students developed with Anton Katz, this artist from Ukraine. This is underneath the train tracks in Campanhã. And so just a teaser of two things that we are dealing with right now. One is the summer school for the next year. It was supposed to be this year in Malta. We were supposed to have a summer school called Migration, Media and Advanced Practices in Malta in June this year, but we had an online version of that summer school. Orlando is part of the group. Elena Lacruz is part of the group as well. And so what we're doing is gathering information with the Media Lab in Basel, the Media Lab in Concordia, and the group, the European Forum for Advanced Practices, so to map this diversity in Malta, then go there in November, and then in June next year. So summer school was inverted from something physically engaged with fieldwork to something much more analytical and prepared from a distance and internationally, which then will jump to the field. It's a different, less sensorial, less Francesco Carreri's walking approach, and maybe more systematic. And the other is a failure right now. We want to do this book, The Observatory of Freixo. It's a book that will gather 20 essays and the work of artists working the last 20 years in Freixo. We applied to Curadoria, and we were the first not to be supported, so we are the first losers. And who knows if next year we can try again. So this is what I wanted to bring to the table. It's more like a work in progress. So how these people, different geographies, different preoccupations, how we try to organize ourselves. And that's it. Yeah? Okay.